Hello viewers, welcome to week 6, lecture 5 of Swayam course on 20th century literary criticism and theory part 1. I am Ashish Kumar Pathak, assistant professor, Department of English, Banaras Hindu University, and in this lecture I am going to talk about semiotics, its development over the course of 20th century, and what kind of relationship it had with structuralist theories and theories which developed later on. So as we know that semiotics simply means study of signs. And if we look at Saussures' basic concept, how he looks at words not as words in traditional sense, rather as signs in terms of signifier and signified. However, other critics talked about semiotics and semiology in a different way. Semiotics is a word which is given, which is preferred by critics on European scene, and semiology is something that is synonymous with semiotics. So semiotics may be taken as a science of a science that studies the life of science within society, and it is also conceived as semiology. For example, it comes from the Greek word semion, science and study of science. So linguistics is only a part of general science of semiology. So Ferdinand de Saussure, believes that linguistics is only a part of semiology. Semiology or semiotics, they are broader terms, and each cultural phenomena, it can be understood in terms of semiotics, and each cultural phenomena other than literature, for example, the system of myths, various kinds of food cultures, dress cultures, they all can be understood in terms of semiotics. Semiotics also believes in the principle that language is not only verbal all the time. So semioticians believe that it is a fallacy to reduce language to the level of verbal meaning. There are many signs, there are many indicators, and things are or meanings are conveyed to us with those signs. For example, we walk on the roads, we see traffic signals. Now, we have an understanding of traffic signals, and different kinds of lights, they communicate different kinds of things to us. For example, Barth was particularly interested in the system of dressing, or he has taken a lot of interest in fashion, and he looks at fashion in terms of semiology. Various kinds of dresses that we wear, informal dresses, formal dresses, different kinds of ties, different kinds of shirts, formals, casuals. So he says that all these things, without uttering anything, they also convey meanings. Though they are non-verbal, but they may be taken as signs, and they have a meaning which is clearly understood by people. So that is the area of semiotics and semiology. And these, for example, C.S. Peirce, who was an important proponent of this movement called semiotics, he says that logic is only another name for semiotics, which is the quasi necessary or formal doctrine of science. So the notion of a science of science was conceived on the both sides of Atlantic. The terms semiology and semiotics are both used to refer to the science, the only difference between them being that semiology is preferred by Europeans who defended Saussure, and semiotics tends to be preferred by English speakers who defend Peirce. So it is very obvious that Europeans prefer the term semiology, while British people prefer the term semiotics. This field of semiotics ranges from the study of communicative behaviors of animals to the study of bodily communication such as kinemics and proxemics, and aesthetic theory and rhetoric. For example, zoosemiotics is a field which talks about various signs which are made by animals. For example, animals, they make different kind of movements and gestures. They produce different kinds of noises and sounds, and those noises and sounds are not illogical. So as we know that how semiotics, the semiotics believes in logic. It strongly believes in logic, right? So all these utterances are not meaningless or they are not without logic. We can further say that semiology is a sign, okay. The boundaries of semiotics are coterminous with another embracing discipline called communication. So semiotics is another name we can say for communication. We have seen, that Roman Jakobson's theory of communication, where he looks at communication in terms of 6 elements: addresser, addressee, and then reference, context, metalingual, code. Similarly, semioticians also believe that language has certain things. For example, there is a sign and it has a signifying aspect, signifier or signified, right? So in this way, their concept of semiology or understanding of semiotics is very much closer to understanding of communication. Human beings communicate by non-verbal means and in ways which must consequently be said to be either non-linguistics or that must have the effect of stretching. These semioticians believe that every speech act includes the transmission of message through the languages of gesture, posture, clothing, hairstyle, perfume, accent, social context, etc., over and above, under and beneath, even at cross purposes with what words actually say. So, all in all, these semioticians are emphasizing that communication cannot be dependent solely on verbal language. Rather, communication depends on various signs as well, and they are capable of emitting various kinds of message. Those messages are encoded. So, and the code is something that is common to people. Therefore, we make sense of them. Even when we are not speaking or being spoken to, messages from other languages crowd in upon us. Horns hoot, lights flash, hoardings proclaim, smells attract or repel. Even the feel of objects systematically communicates something meaningful to us. For instance, suppose we are walking on a road and there are two conditions. You are walking on a road in the wee hours of morning, in the early hours of morning. There we find that a few vehicles are there. We feel the atmosphere, we feel the wind and the freshness of the wind. It communicates to us that this road or this particular region is not very crowded with motor vehicles or auto vehicles. While we are walking at one time and there is a very strong sense of, there's very strong smell of what is called various kind of combustions or various kinds of smoke which is there in the air because of vehicles. Naturally, it communicates to us that this region is overtly crowded. We are watching a match or something like that. So it is not that every time one is uttering the word that, okay, the team is winning or the team is losing. Many times the gestures, even a person is sitting in isolation, sitting alone, not surrounded by a crowd. There you find his gestures, they are very much capable of communicating messages, right, which are related to the performance of the sportsman that he is watching. So in this way, how life is Perhaps it consists more of non-verbal communication than verbal communication. And perhaps gestures or those things which are non-verbal, they are more potent, more capable of transmitting messages than verbal things are. So man's role in this world is quintessentially one of communication. For example, as Jakobson writes, every message is made of signs. Correspondingly, the science of signs, termed semiotic, deals with those general principles which underlie the structure of all signs, whatever, and with the character of their utilization within messages, as well as the specifics of various sign systems and of those diverse messages using those different kinds of signs. For example, Jakobson argues that a sign has two aspects, an immediately perceptible signans and an inferable, apprehensible signatum. Right. So he defines signs in terms of two ways. What is immediate? Immediated, for example, we see a sign, visual perception of a sign. We see somewhere aunt is written on the board. So that contact is immediate. That is what he calls signan, immediately perceptible. Or we hear some noise, hooting of horn. We hear the noise, immediately we perceive it. This is called signan. And after that, there is called inference. That is what he calls signatum. We see something written on the board like aunt I refer to. So then we think about that, why it has been written. What is the intention of writing that on board? Or somewhere we hear a noise. So later on we think about what could be the causes of that noise. What does that noise in fact mean? Is it a noise of alarm? Or it is a simple noise? So all these things which we understand by inference. So signan and signatum. So he says that between these two forms, there lies the basis of semiotic structures. In C.S. Peirce's views, logic exists independently of both reasoning and fact. Its fundamental principles are definitions and divisions. And he goes on to say that as a result, logic can be seen as the science of the general necessary law of science. So logic is the science of science, that is what he says. Further, we can look at science in different ways. A sign, or what he calls a representative, is something which stands to somebody for something in some respect or capacity. It is anything which determines something else. It's interpretant, to refer to an object to which it refers to. For example, a sign may represent something. A sign may exist as an interpretation of something. It refers to something, it interprets it. So a sign stands for something, or something is an object. It stands for something to somebody. That is its interpretant. And finally, it stands for something to somebody in some respect, that is ground. So in this way, if we look at this concept of signs, there are four principles which can be seen. One is this representative, the other is interpretant, and the object, and out of their relationship, the three things, it is based on a ground. So, the terms such as representative, object, interpretant, and ground refer to the means by which sign signifies, and the relationship between them determines the precise nature of this process of semiosis. Further, this relationship, Peirce says, involves three elements, that is representative, or the object, and ground, in three kinds of triadic structures or trichotomies. So he says that, if we look at these triadic structures or trichotomies, It reminds of a sashus as well, that if you look at sign, it has always three aspects. The sign itself, its signifier, how it acts as a signifier, how it acts as a signified, or how what is signified. He says that out of these triadic relationships, various concepts, various new terminologies can be conceived. So, for example, he says that triadic relations of comparison based on the kind of signs. It involves the qualisign, a quality which acts as a sign once it is embodied, the sen sign, an actual thing or event which acts simply or singly, and legisign, a law that acts as sign. And he says that this triadic relation, it is based on three levels. It can be understood in three parts. One is that of comparison that we have seen between qualisign, legisign, and sen sign. Then it also depends, this triadic relationship also depends on performance, where it involves three terms: icon, index, and symbol. For example, this icon is something in which one thing represents the other. For example, there is a map. So map represents a geographical region. That is how we can understand that icon. So far as this symbol is concerned, in symbol, the relationship between two things is not direct. For example, smoke. So smoke may symbolize fire somewhere. So this is how we understand all these relationships. Index is something that points towards something. Index, in fact, comes from finger. Like if we look at something, we finger at something, so that is called how we are showing, we are hinting in that direction. So in a way, we use a term, we use a sign, and it hints in that direction. So in this way, that is called index or indexing. So the third aspect is that this triadic relations of thought, it is based on a kind of object which involves riem or seem, and dissent or design or feel. And later on, we'll find that how by combining all these aspects of semiotics, how syntactical structures are made, how new meanings are generated by different signs. So Peirce goes on to propose various possible combinations of 9 types of signs that would yield 10 classes of sign. That is dissent, symbol, legisign, a rhematic, indexical, sin sign. And in this way, how the first combination, that is dissent, symbol, legisign, the combination of the three will result in a sort of proposition. The rhematic, indexical, and sin sign combination, it will result in a spontaneous cry, or spontaneous cry can be understood in terms of those combination, or a dissent, indexical, sin sign, a weathercock. So that is how the combinations of various signs, it may signify different words. So we see that how combinations between 10 fundamental classes of signs ultimately yield 66 fuller classes of signs, and various groups of these achieve fundamental importance in Peirce's analysis and systematization of logic. They say that anything which can be isolated and then connected with something else and interpreted can function as a sign. So according to Peirce, the framework for the existence of knowledge derives from the assertion of propositions through second triad, that is signs, icon, index, symbol, and their importance thus requires to take a closer look at them. So we have already talked about that how the relationship between sign and object manifests a community in some quality, a similarity of fitness of resemblance proposed by the sign to be acknowledged by its receiver. For example, this iconic relationship. A diagram or a painting has an iconic relationship to its object, for it resembles it. It is the signifier to the subject's signified in the iconic mode. In the in-text, the relationship is concrete, actual, and usually sequential, a causal kind. As I noticed that how the pointing finger is a signifier whose relationship to its signified is indexical in mode. For example, a knock on the door is an index of someone's presence, and the sound of a car's horn is a sign that the car's presence in the same mode. And index, we have seen how index and fire, they are related to each other, right? Or a weathercock is an index of direction of wind. Similarly, in the symbol, the relationship between signifier and signified is arbitrary. Where my pointing finger or my observation of a leaf could be said to be the index of a tree, my utterance of the word tree is a symbol of the tree, because there is no inherent, necessarily tree-like quality in that signifier. Its relationship to an actual tree remains fundamentally arbitrary, which is sustained only by the structure of language, not by anything beyond that. So, very much like structuralists, these semioticians also believe that these signs do not refer to any external reality, any referential reality. They are very much governed by their own intrinsic laws. And Peirce's analysis tells us a good deal about the kinds of signs that exist, about the way signs work, and what sort of procedures govern the use we make of them. So one of Saussures' most powerful interpreters in the manner of semiotics has been Roland Barthes. For example, Barthes gives an analogy of a bunch of roses. For example, if there are a bunch of roses, so in this way they can be taken as signifier. And what is signified by a bunch of roses? Maybe passions are signified by the bunch of roses. However, Barthes goes on to say that with the passage of time, this signifier rose, it itself becomes a sign. However, this sign is an empty sign, and he says that the sign has no meaning unless it is seen in context of horticultural unit. So this is how this meaning of signs or any kind of suggested by these signs, it is extensive. That is what Barthes is talking about. And in this essay, Myth Today, he puts the case that any semiotic analysis must postulate a relationship between the two terms, signifier and signified, which is not one of equality, but of equivalence. So in this way, in respect of language, the structural relationship between sound image and concept constitutes what Saussure calls the linguistic signs. So how, this concept of sign, it has been, discussed by these thinkers. So the relationship between the two produces the third term. For example, bunch of roses example that as I have discussed. As a signifier, the bunch of rose is empty. As a sign, it is full. What fills it is a combination of the speaker's intent and nature of society's conventional modes and channels, which offer a range of vehicles for the purpose. Right? Like in his book, Mythologies, Barthes writes, take a black pebble, I can make it signify several ways. It is a mere signifier. But if I weigh it with a definite signified, a death sentence, for instance, anonymous way, it will become a sign. So in case of myth, Barthes argues, we find again tripartite signifying operation described above, the signifier, the signified, and their product, that is the sign. So human beings emerge from any account of semiotic structures as inveterate and promiscuous producers of signs. Right. So as it has been said earlier and believed by all these thinkers, that The primary purpose of the existence of humanity or human beings is that of communication. And if that being their primary purpose, they cannot refrain themselves from using signs in different contexts. For example, Jakobson writes, written language is prone to develop its peculiar structural properties so that the history of two chief linguistic varieties, speech and letters, is rich in dialectical tensions and alterations of mutual repulsions and attractions. So, when we take up the question of what semiotics can contribute to the study of literature, the peculiar structural properties of writing clearly become crucial as they form semiotically a large part of what any piece of writing communicates. So, having said that, let us have a look at certain quotations which can help us understand this movement, structuralism or semiotics, which were related to each other. So, we can sum up what structuralism has told us so far. The structuralist idea is to follow literature in its overall evolution while making synchronic cuts at various stages and comparing the tables with one another. Literary evolution then appears in all its richness, which derives from the fact that the system survives while constantly altering. Then what Barth says, culture as a general system of symbols, there is unity in this symbolic field. Culture in all its aspects is a language. Therefore, it is possible today to anticipate the creation of a single unified science of culture, which will depend on diverse disciplines, all devoted to analyzing on different levels of description, culture as language, that Barth writes. Similarly, Saussure writes, language as a structured system is both a self-contained whole and a principle of classification. As soon as we give linguistic structure pride of place among facts of language, we introduce a natural order into an aggregate which lends itself to no other classification. And the structuralist view is that how no individual poem has significance in isolation. It can be understood only in terms of the relationship between itself and the structures of expectation, for example, of period, genre, or poetry itself, which exist in the reader's mind. So, understanding this structure is more important than interpreting the individual poem. And in this way, we understand that structuralism is an interpretive which is not interested in individual works of literature. Rather, it believes that every work is only an item which is a part of the larger structure of literature or literary conventions which have existed since the evolution of human society or even before that. You have to follow this assignment in week 6. Read Roland Barthes' essay, The Death of the Author. Second, how can you link structuralism with Russian formalism? Answer in 200 words. Third, relate semiotics with the development of writing and speech in 100 words. And fourth, both structuralism and post-structuralism consider meaning as being constructed instead of a given or a priori. Illustrate with a stanza of Ode on Grecianon by Keats. So with that, I come to the end of this unit. Thank you.